"Here's Johnny." The iconic shout echoed. The velvet curtains parted, and millions of Americans erupted in applause. For 30 years, the beige sofa of The Tonight Show was revered as the throne of kindness and talent. But there was a horrifying truth the cameras never captured. That very seat also served as a sanctuary for the 20th century's most perfectly disguised monsters. These weren't mugshot criminals plastered on street corners. They were Hollywood's top-tier stars. We are talking about Bill Cosby, America's dad. Revealed to be a predator who drugged and violated women en masse, we are talking about Bob Crane, the sunny-smiled Colonel Hogan, who possessed a secret vault filled with sick, surreptitiously recorded footage. We are talking about Roman Polanski and Woody Allen, artistic geniuses worshipped by the world. Yet who exploited their fame to commit acts of pedophilia and incest right under the public's nose? How was Johnny Carson, the man with the sharpest judge of character in Hollywood, deceived by them? Let's reopen the 7 darkest files, where televised smiles were merely masks concealing souls that had rotted from the inside out. Bill Cosby, America's dad, and the sickening sedative. The relationship between Johnny Carson and Bill Cosby could be considered one of the most enduring professional friendships in Hollywood at that time. Johnny didn't just like Bill, he admired the cleanliness of Bill's comedy. While other comedians resorted to vulgar language or sensitive topics to get laughs, Bill Cosby chose the path of a storyteller spinning tales about family, childhood, and education. Because of this absolute trust, Johnny granted Bill a privilege no one else had: the position of guest host, the person who replaced Johnny to lead the show on nights he was absent. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Bill Cosby sat in that power chair, revered by millions of Americans as a moral icon, a model, America's dad. Johnny Carson, with a drink in hand from the wings, often smiled with satisfaction, believing he was sharing the spotlight with the kindest man in the entertainment world. But let me take you away from those bright studio lights, back in time to a freezing winter night in 1982 at Lake Tahoe, Nevada. The setting is no longer a bustling studio, but the presidential suite of Harrah's Hotel where Bill Cosby was staying after a sold-out show. In the fragmented memory of an ambitious 19-year-old model named Jay, one of dozens of later victims that night began with pure admiration. She was invited to mentor Bill Cosby's room to discuss a potential role. The room was vast, carpeted in thick velvet, with soft yellow lighting and a crackling fireplace creating a cozy, safe feeling. Bill Cosby sat there, wearing his familiar turtleneck sweater, looking anything but threatening. He poured her a steaming cup of cappuccino, his warm, deep voice sounding like a father advising his daughter, "You look so tense in this business. You have to know how to relax. Drink this. It will help you unwind." Jay hesitated for a moment, but then she looked into his eyes. Those were the eyes of Dr. Huxtable on TV, the eyes of Johnny Carson's close friend. How could a man this great harm her? She raised the cup and drank it all, the bitter taste of coffee mixing with a strange flavor she tried to ignore. Bill smiled, a smile so gentle it was terrifying, then handed her a tiny blue pill. "Take this too, just a vitamin, good for your skin." Just 20 minutes later, Jay's world began to tilt. First came the feeling of eyelids heavy as lead, then her tongue went numb. She tried to stand up to say she wanted to leave, but her legs no longer obeyed her brain's commands. The luxurious suite suddenly turned into a spinning cage. The image of Bill Cosby in front of her began to blur, splitting into 2, then 3. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the loss of bodily control, but the change in the attitude of America's dad. Bill Cosby was no longer sitting there smiling. He stood up, slowly approaching her. Jay recalled the terrifying feeling of wanting to scream, but her throat only emitting meaningless whimpering sounds. She saw him shed the dignified sweater, the benevolent face vanishing, replaced by the cold, hungry gaze of a predator observing prey that had fallen into a trap. He guided her, or rather, dragged her limp body toward the bed, in a delirium half awake, half asleep. Jay heard his voice echoing in her ear, not the moral admonitions on The Tonight Show, but sick whispers. "Good girl, just let Daddy take care of everything." That night was a blank space in memory interspersed with disjointed, painful flashbacks, the heavy weight pressing on her, breath reeking of alcohol, and the utter helplessness of realizing she was being violated but unable to lift a finger to resist. When Jay woke up the next morning, she found herself lying alone on the massive bed, disheveled clothes thrown on the floor, and Bill Cosby had vanished, leaving a small stack of cash on the vanity as if paying for a commodity. She left the hotel in humiliation, carrying that terrifying secret for decades, because she knew if she opened her mouth to accuse America's dad, the whole world would bury her. The scariest part was that just a few days after that fateful night at Lake Tahoe, Bill Cosby appeared on The Tonight Show again. He sat with legs crossed, laughing heartily with Johnny Carson. Johnny, completely unaware of the demon that had just manifested in a hotel room, still patted Bill on the shoulder and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, give a round of applause for the kindest man I've ever known." The audience applauded thunderously. Bill Cosby smiled humbly, his eyes scanning past the camera lens, the eyes of a man who had just committed the perfect crime and knew he would never be punished. Decades later, when the veil of secrecy was torn apart and dozens of women stepped into the light, people were startled looking back at old footage. There is a clip of Bill Cosby appearing on television, joking about Spanish fly, an aphrodisiac with an excited face and strangely hungry eyes. Back then, the audience roared with laughter thinking it was humor. But now, looking back at those eyes, we feel a chill down our spine. The cruel contrast between the crime in the hotel room and the smile on television is the essence of this scam of the century. Johnny Carson spent his entire career searching for true talent. But with Bill Cosby, he inadvertently nurtured a monster. The Quaaludes, a powerful sedative popular at the time, made his victims not only lose the ability to resist, they lost their memories, lost the right to control their own bodies. And the silence of dozens of victims like Jay was the expensive price that Hollywood's glamour covered up. Bob Crane, Colonel Hogan, and the Dungeon of Pleasure. Bob Crane was the kind of guest Johnny Carson always welcomed with open arms. In the mid-70s, Bob was a shining star thanks to the role of Colonel Hogan in the hit series Hogan's Heroes. He was handsome, articulate, and had a knack Johnny loved playing drums exceptionally well. Every time Bob appeared on The Tonight Show, the studio atmosphere seemed recharged. He always smiled that signature sunny American smile, telling witty stories about theater tours across the country. Johnny often patted Bob on the shoulder, praising him as a family man and a multi-talented artist. The audience looked at Bob and saw a friendly neighbor, someone you'd want to invite to a weekend barbecue. But Johnny Carson, and the whole world, didn't know that behind that radiant smile was a sex addict sliding down into a cesspool of depravity, a man obsessed with recording dark footage that eventually led to his gruesome death. Let me take you away from the warm lights of Burbank to another setting, much more stifling and gloomy. It was a night in June 1978 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Not a luxurious five-star hotel, but apartment 132A in the Winfield Place complex, a temporary residence Bob Crane rented while performing the play Beginner's Luck, in the memory of a girl who was Bob's victim. She met him by chance at a local bar that night, began with the excitement of being noticed by a TV star. Bob Crane in real life was as charming as on TV. He invited her back to his apartment to listen to music and talk. Upon entering the room, she felt an indescribable strangeness. The room was messy, reeking of stale cigarette smoke and men. But what caught her attention most wasn't the clutter, but the pile of electronic equipment stacked in the corner tripods, tangled cables, and a bulky Sony Portapack video camera, a luxury and rare technology at the time. Bob Crane no longer had the witty demeanor seen on The Tonight Show. He became feverish, limbs clumsy as he began mounting the camera on the stand. He explained to her in a persuasive tone, but his eyes darted around strangely. "Baby, I want to preserve your beauty. This is art. Only you and I will see it." She felt uncomfortable. She wanted to refuse, but the pressure from the fame of a Colonel Hogan made her hesitate. And then, the door opened. Another man walked in, John Carpenter, a close friend and also Bob's private technician. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. It was no longer a romantic date. It turned into a cheap and slimy film set. Bob Crane at this moment seemed to forget her emotional presence. He only cared about camera angles, lighting, and ensuring John Carpenter had pressed the REC button. She recalled the feeling of no longer being a human, but just a specimen in their sick collection. Bob performed sexual acts not out of passion or love, but to perform for that soulless lens. He constantly glanced at the blinking red light on the camera rather than looking into her eyes. That was the deviation of an addict. He didn't seek pleasure from fleshly contact, but sought satisfaction from re-watching himself in those depraved footages the next day. When she left the apartment at dawn, she felt she had just escaped a cave of obsession, where female dignity was ground into pitch-black magnetic tapes. Just a few days after that night, on the morning of June 29, 1978, shocking news broke. Bob Crane was found dead in that very apartment. He was beaten so savagely he was unrecognizable, and the weapon was believed to be the very camera tripod he used to record his orgies. But what horrified the police, and later Johnny Carson, more than the corpse, was what they found in the closet. Hundreds, thousands of videotapes and photo albums recording Bob's sexual relations with countless women. Many of them had absolutely no idea they were being secretly filmed. The funny Colonel Hogan was actually a hardcore sex addict who had turned his life into an endless porn movie. When this news reached Johnny Carson's ears, he was truly shocked. He couldn't believe the man he had just joked with about playing drums last week had such a dark secret life. The image of Bob Crane on the sofa, laughing and talking about family happiness, now became distorted and creepy. Johnny realized that Bob's sunny smile was just a thin coat of paint covering emptiness and extreme loneliness, which Bob had to fill with meaningless carnal conquests. Bob Crane's death and his trove of depraved tapes were a slap in the face of the moral mask of Hollywood at the time. It exposed the truth that behind the applause in Burbank, there were souls that had rotted long ago. Bob Crane remains on this list as the most terrifying warning about the destruction of uncontrolled lust. He didn't die because of fame. He died because of the very tools he used to satisfy his deviance, leaving Johnny Carson and the audience with a haunting question: do we ever really know who is sitting opposite us? Roman Polanski, the genius veneer of a pedophile. In Johnny Carson's world, some guests were greeted with fanatical adulation, while others commanded a respect tinged with profound sympathy. Roman Polanski belonged to the latter group. When the diminutive Polish director walked onto the Tonight Show stage in the mid-70s, the audience saw not just the mastermind behind horror masterpieces like Rosemary's Baby or Chinatown, but the pitiable widower of Sharon Tate, victim of the horrific Manson massacre. Johnny Carson, ever the sophisticated host, always lowered his voice when conversing with Roman. He looked at him with the eyes of a man of experience sharing pain with another man. On that sofa, Roman Polanski appeared as a symbol of resilience, a great artist carrying an unhealable soul wound. Johnny believed that a man who had endured such massive loss would surely cherish life and people more than anyone. But Johnny was wrong. The tragedy of the past did not turn Roman into a saint. On the contrary, it seemed to become the perfect cloak to hide the pedophilic demon reigning inside. Let me take you away from the dazzling NBC studio, across the glamorous boulevards of Los Angeles, up the winding roads of Mulholland Drive. It was the afternoon of March 10, 1977. A lemon-yellow Mercedes pulled up to the gate of actor Jack Nicholson's secluded mansion. The owner was away, leaving only the eerie silence of the wealthy hills. Stepping out was not a silver-screen starlet, but Samantha Geimer, a girl of only 13 with an innocent face and wide, anxious eyes. Beside her was Roman Polanski, the 43-year-old man with illustrious fame. In Samantha's hazy memory, that afternoon began with the promise of an artistic photo shoot for the prestigious Vogue magazine. To a 13-year-old girl dreaming of the fashion world, Roman Polanski was a ticket to paradise. He led her around the empty house, setting up cameras and adjusting lighting with the professionalism of a master. But the atmosphere began to shift when he poured champagne. He handed the flute of sparkling wine to the miner and spoke with the condescending tone of an artist directing a scene. "Drink it. It will help you look more natural on camera." Samantha drank, grimacing at the bitter taste, but she dared not refuse a genius. And then, the stale but cruel script repeated itself, a Quaalude pill. Roman called it a muscle relaxant to help her ease the tension. As the drug kicked in, Samantha's world melted into chaotic patches of color. She remembered being taken to the outdoor jacuzzi. The view of Los Angeles sprawling beneath the hills should have been beautiful, but through her groggy eyes then, it looked like an abyss waiting to swallow her. Roman Polanski was no longer the respectable director on TV. He became a patient predator. He exploited the moment the girl was in a stupor, having lost all ability to resist, to commit a depraved act right in his friend's home. Samantha recalled the extreme fear when realizing the line between art and abuse had been erased, but her tender 13-year-old body could not push the 43-year-old man away. She was just a doll in his hands, a tool for him to satisfy his twisted lust under the guise of finding inspiration. What makes this story utterly bitter is what happened next. When arrested and facing prison time, Roman Polanski did not choose to face it like a man. He chose to run. He fled to France, leaving America and his small victim behind. And Johnny Carson, who had given him the highest respect on air, had to witness a humiliating truth. The guest he once admired for talent, the man he once pitied for his fate, was actually a cowardly child sex offender. Years later, looking back at old interview tapes, one feels a chill at Polanski's sharp gaze and arrogant smile. Johnny Carson had asked him about beauty, about art, but Johnny never knew that Polanski's definition of beauty included the destruction of a child's innocence. The connection between Johnny and Polanski is a tragedy of misplaced trust. Johnny represented the moral standard of American media, while Polanski represented depravity camouflaged by extraordinary talent. Woody Allen, the incestuous intellectual. During the golden years of The Tonight Show, Woody Allen's appearance was always a special event, like a philosopher wandering into a Hollywood party. Johnny Carson, with the elegance of a West Coast gentleman, always held a mixture of respect and amusement for Woody, the quintessential representative of the anxious and profound East Coast intelligentsia. On that familiar sofa, Woody Allen sat, his small frame lost in a worn tweed suit, constantly adjusting his thick horn-rimmed glasses, stuttering jokes about the meaninglessness of life, therapy sessions, and failures in love. The audience roared with laughter, seeing how adorable and harmless he was. Johnny Carson laughed too, tapping a rhythm on the desk, looking at Woody like a strange but genius creature. In Johnny's eyes, Woody was a pure artist, a man too busy with philosophical musings to do anything cruel or vulgar. But Johnny, and the whole world, was deceived by that very clumsy, bookish exterior. To understand the horrific shock that came later, let me take you to a bleak afternoon on January 13, 1992, at the Manhattan penthouse of Mia Farrow, Woody Allen's longtime partner and muse. The atmosphere in the house was quiet, but it was the calm before the storm. Mia stopped by Woody's apartment while he was away, and fate led her to the fireplace, where a small box seemed to have been forgotten. Curious, she opened it, thinking it might be a new script or scribbled notes from her genius lover. But what she found were not words, but a stack of Polaroid photos. When Mia picked up the first photo, her world collapsed. In the picture was Soon-Yi Previn, her adopted Korean daughter, whom she had raised and cared for since childhood. Soon-Yi was then just a naive college student, but in these photos, Soon-Yi was wearing nothing, posing in explicitly sexual positions right in Woody's apartment. Mia trembled as she flipped to the second, the third. All were of Soon-Yi. Nausea hit her not because of the images themselves, but because of the horrific truth they represented. The man she called husband, though not legally married, who played a fatherly role in the family, who ate dinner with her, raised the children with her, was secretly having sex with her own daughter right under their shared roof. The luxurious living room suddenly became cold as a morgue. Mia recalled the times Woody came over, the way he showed interest in Soon-Yi, the way he took the girl to basketball games or for ice cream. At the time, she thought it was fatherly love, family bonding. Now, those memories returned like knives. That wasn't care. It was the grooming process of a patient predator hiding behind a father figure. Woody Allen didn't just betray Mia, he broke the most sacred taboo of family structure. Woody's deviance wasn't physical violence, but cruel psychological manipulation, where the line between father and child, between morality and lust, was completely erased. When the scandal exploded and became the focus of global media, Johnny Carson was in the final days of his The Tonight Show career. It is said Johnny was heavily shocked. He rewatched old tapes where Woody Allen sat there, joking about liking young girls, or lines in the movie Manhattan where Woody's character dates a high school student. Back then, Johnny laughed thinking it was artistic exaggeration. Now, Johnny shuddered realizing those might have been public confessions. Woody Allen had brought his twisted view onto television, hiding it under the guise of intellectual humor. And Johnny, along with millions of viewers, had unwittingly applauded that sickness. The image of Woody Allen in Johnny Carson's eyes transformed instantly from an eccentric genius into a terrifying narcissist, one willing to trample on all moral principles to satisfy his ego. Woody Allen never showed remorse. He casually married Soon-Yi and called it true love, ignoring the ultimate pain of Mother Mia Farrow and the confusion of the other children. Jerry Lewis, the clown with the heart of a tyrant. If there was anyone who could turn the Tonight Show studio into a chaotic marketplace in a split second, it was Jerry Lewis. His appearance was always a tornado in the literal sense. Jerry didn't walk onto the stage. He jumped, he slid, he screamed, he smashed fake props. His energy was endless, the controlled chaos of a genius. Johnny Carson, who always maintained a calm demeanor, often had to yield the stage to Jerry, accepting the role of the straight man so Jerry could run wild. The audience loved Jerry Lewis passionately. They saw in him an eternal childlike soul, a man who spent his life raising funds for disabled children through the famous telethon. In the public eye, Jerry was a living saint, the embodiment of compassion and carefree laughter. But Johnny Carson, who sat opposite Jerry dozens of times over decades, saw something else in those eyes. When the laughter died down, Jerry Lewis's eyes became cold, emotionless, and held a profound contempt for the whole world, especially women. Let me take you away from those thunderous applause to step into the cramped and stifling space of the VIP dressing room at NBC on a late evening in 1982. Outside, the band was playing lively tunes to warm up the audience, but inside this room, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and fear. Jerry Lewis was sitting before the mirror, not to apply makeup, but to perform a familiar ritual of his addicted years, downing a handful of Percodan painkillers. At this moment, he wasn't the funny clown. He was a man in pain, irritable, and full of hatred. A young female production assistant timidly knocked and entered. Her task was simply to announce that there were 5 minutes until airtime and ask if he needed more water. A normal question, a normal task. But for Jerry Lewis, in a drug haze and the arrogance of a narcissist, the presence of a woman in his private space was an insult. He whipped around. his face distorted not for comedy, but with rage. He threw a glass tumbler against the wall, shards shattering right at the poor girl's feet. And then he began to scream. Not normal scolding, but vicious insults aimed directly at her gender. "Get out of here! Don't let me see your female faces in here!" Jerry's scream echoed, piercing even the thick soundproof walls. The assistant stood frozen, tears streaming down in panic. She was facing her idol, the one she watched on TV since childhood, and realized he viewed her and all women as less than a speck of dust. Jerry Lewis never hid his twisted views, though he often wrapped them in jokes. He once publicly stated, "I think of a woman as a producing machine that brings babies in the world, not for comedy." But in that closed room, that view was no longer theory. It manifested as naked mental abuse. He hated women having a voice, having power, or simply being present in his creative space. The door burst open. Johnny Carson appeared. He had heard the commotion. Johnny looked at the trembling assistant, the broken glass, and looked into Jerry Lewis's eyes. In that instant, Johnny clearly saw the real demon. It wasn't humor. It was the cruelty of a man who believed he was the center of the universe, who had the right to trample on anyone to satisfy his megalomaniacal ego. But the scariest thing was Jerry's ability to flip the switch. Just minutes later, when the theme music played, Jerry Lewis walked onto the stage with a grin stretching ear to ear, dancing like a child, hugging Johnny, and speaking words of love to the audience. Sarah stood in the wings, wiping tears, watching the man who just humiliated her being hailed by all of America as the man with a heart of gold. Jerry Lewis's deviance didn't lie in sex or physical violence, but in a personality twisted to a pathological degree. He was a true family tyrant. People only learned later that behind the image of the father loving children on the telethon, Jerry treated his own 6 biological sons terribly. He beat, controlled, and terrorized them mentally throughout their childhood. The peak of cruelty was when he died. He left a will cutting all 6 biological sons out of the inheritance, leaving them not a penny as a final punishment from beyond the grave. Johnny Carson, though always maintaining a professional attitude, gradually felt exhausted and disgusted every time he had to face this hypocrisy. He realized Jerry Lewis didn't perform comedy to bring joy to others. Jerry performed to be worshipped, and when the lights went out, when no one clapped, that clown became a hateful loner, pouring bitterness onto the weakest people around him. Mickey Rooney, the screen legend turned dirty old man. In the memories of millions of American viewers, Mickey Rooney was the embodiment of innocence, enthusiasm, and undying optimism. As Andy Hardy, he was the boy next door every mother wanted her daughter to marry. Johnny Carson was no exception. He grew up with those films and held a special respect for Mickey, that of a junior for a giant. But time is a cruel reagent. As Mickey Rooney entered his twilight years and appeared frequently on The Tonight Show in the 80s, Johnny began to realize that the innocent Andy Hardy of yesteryear had vanished. In his place was a chaotic, loud old man harboring a pathological thirst for women, a man who believed past glory allowed him to touch anyone, anywhere, without asking. Let me take you backstage at NBC on an afternoon in October 1983. In the green room, the waiting area where guests meet before airtime, the atmosphere is usually polite and social. But today, that quiet was shattered by Mickey Rooney's booming voice. He walked in, diminutive but dominating the space with overwhelming energy. Sitting in the corner was a rising young actress, let's call her Lisa, representing the many girls who fell into this situation. Lisa was nervously reviewing her script, hands trembling holding a cup of water. She looked up as the screen legend approached, preparing a respectful smile. But Mickey didn't stop at a social distance. He swooped down, sitting right next to her, completely invading her personal space. His wrinkled hand didn't extend for a shake but grabbed Lisa's pale hand, holding it tight and starting to stroke it. "You're so beautiful, beautiful like the stars of my time," Mickey said, breath reeking of mint mixed with tobacco puffing into the young girl's face. Lisa smiled forcedly, trying to withdraw her hand skillfully, but Mickey wouldn't let go. He considered that weak resistance adorable shyness. His hand began to move, patting the back of her hand, then sliding up her bare arm, accompanied by leering looks sweeping the body of a girl young enough to be his granddaughter. In that room, Lisa's admiration vanished, replaced by a creepy goosebumps feeling. She was being harassed by a monument, and she didn't know what to do to avoid being called rude. Mickey Rooney's perversion didn't stop backstage when the stage lights turned on. That nightmare was broadcast live to millions of homes. Johnny Carson sat at his desk, introducing Mickey Rooney to thunderous applause. Mickey walked out, blew kisses to the audience, then sat down. But instead of focusing on Johnny, Mickey turned to the female guest sitting next to him, Lisa. On camera, Mickey constantly interrupted her, leaned over, put his hand on her knee, sometimes even leaning close to her ear to whisper teasing jokes. The audience below roared with laughter, thinking it was the humorous act of a funny old man. They saw a cute grandpa flirting with a young girl, but Johnny Carson sat there, and he saw something else. Johnny saw Lisa's stiff body. He saw the distorted smile on the girl's lips. He realized Mickey's hand was placed where it shouldn't be. In a rare moment, Johnny Carson, who usually let guests perform freely, had to intervene. He tapped his pencil hard on the desk, a subtle but decisive signal to attract attention. He called out, "Mickey, look over here. I'm the one interviewing you." Johnny leaned his body slightly forward, creating an invisible barrier between Mickey and the young girl. Johnny's eyes then lost their usual mirth. They were sharp and stern. An implicit warning, "Stop it right now, you're crossing the line." Mickey Rooney paused for a moment, laughed goofily, then turned to Johnny, but his hand lingered, unwilling to leave. Mickey's terror lay in the fact that he had absolutely no concept of boundaries. He lived in the delusion that he was still the world's #1 star, that every woman yearned to be touched by him. He used age as a shield. "I'm old, I'm just joking." But to Johnny and insiders, it wasn't a joke. It was abuse of soft power. It was the behavior of a dirty old man exploiting others' respect to satisfy his groping, womanizing habit. After that taping, Johnny Carson didn't go to Mickey's dressing room to say goodbye as usual. He went straight to his car, his face clearly showing fatigue and boredom. He confided to producer Fred de Cordova, "I don't know what to do with Mickey anymore. He's a legend, but he makes me sick. We can't just let him turn this studio into his own spider web." Mickey Rooney continued to be invited, for ratings, for fame, but the distance between him and Johnny grew. Handshakes became formal, smiles became industrial. Mickey Rooney sits on this list as a reminder of a shameful cultural dark corner of old Hollywood, where harassment by powerful men was normalized as romance or artistic temperament. Johnny Carson, though he tried to intervene, was also part of a system that tolerated that behavior for too long. Mickey Rooney wasn't a demon killing or raping in the dark. He was a demon in broad daylight, one who proved that sometimes. The most terrifying violation is the one disguised by applause and the hearty laughter of the audience. Peter Sellers, the multi-personality demon. Imagine you are sitting in the NBC studio on a night in September 1974. The Doc Severinsen Band is playing the mischievous and mysterious Pink Panther theme. The audience applauds wildly, eagerly awaiting the appearance of the clumsy but lovable Inspector Clouseau. Johnny Carson adjusts his tie, flashing a welcoming smile, but deep in his eyes is a rare tension. He knows the guest about to walk out is unlike anyone else. Peter Sellers wasn't a mere actor, he was a chameleon who could change personalities faster than a blink of an eye. But what made Johnny afraid wasn't that talent, but the question, who will walk out tonight? A funny clown, or an unstable mental patient standing on the brink of collapse? When Peter Sellers walked onto the stage, he wore a sleek black suit, bowing to the audience with humility. But when he sat down and turned to face Johnny, the surrounding air seemed to drop a few degrees. Johnny looked into Peter's eyes and saw a horrifying emptiness. No sparkle of joy, no human warmth. Those were shark eyes, dark, emotionless, and deadly. Johnny tried opening with a gentle joke to break the ice, but Peter didn't laugh. He stared at Johnny, then suddenly changed his voice, speaking with the intonation of a German officer, then switching to the voice of an old French woman. The audience roared with laughter, thinking it was top-notch acting. Only Johnny felt the shiver running down his spine. He realized Peter wasn't acting. Peter was hiding. He had to crawl into those personalities because the real Peter Sellers was dead or never existed. To understand the true demon reigning in that thin body, leave the stage lights for a luxurious villa in London, where Peter's wife and children were living under a terrifying dictatorship, completely contrary to the image of the clumsy, cute inspector on screen. Peter Sellers at home was a cruel tyrant and narcissist to a pathological degree. Go back to a birthday evening of his son, Michael. The boy was happily playing with a new toy. Peter walked into the room, not with a father's smile, but with a face fuming with anger for some petty reason, maybe noise, or simply feeling he wasn't the center of attention. In irrational rage, Peter snatched the toy from the little boy's hands, threw it hard on the floor, and stomped it into pieces. The boy screamed in panic, but Peter didn't stop. He screamed, threatened to kick everyone out of the house, threatened suicide, a cruel psychological manipulation tactic he frequently used to punish his wife and children. That night at the Tonight Show studio, that hidden madness leaked out. When Johnny asked a simple question, "Peter, what is the real you like?" Peter Sellers fell silent for a long time. The silence stretched to the point of discomfort. Then he answered, his voice no longer carrying any tone of acting, but sounding like an echo from the grave. "I have no real self, Johnny. I had it surgically removed. When I look in the mirror, I see no one." That answer wasn't a philosophical joke. It was the confession of a corroded soul. Peter Sellers was an empty shell, and to fill that void, he sucked the energy and happiness of those around him, especially his family. Johnny Carson ended that interview feeling exhausted, as if he had just been through a psychological wrestling match. He shook Peter's hand, a hand cold and indifferent. When Peter Sellers left, Johnny turned to Ed McMahon and whispered, "That is the saddest and scariest man I have ever met." Johnny understood that Peter Sellers' humor didn't come from joy, but was extracted from ultimate suffering and mental chaos. Peter Sellers sits at the end of this list because he represents the greatest horror, a demon without horns, without claws, but a demon wearing the face of a crying clown, who turned his life and his loved ones into an endless tragedy under the brilliant stage lights. Johnny Carson, the uncrowned king of American television, spent 30 years sitting in that power chair. He saw the most brilliant roses, but also had to face the most terrifying demons. Professionalism forced him to smile and shake their hands. But perhaps, in quiet moments backstage, Johnny himself shuddered at the abysses of personality sitting opposite him. Stage lights can blind the audience, but they never wash away the stains on the soul. These 7 names will forever be long scars on Hollywood's glamorous face, reminding us that, sometimes, the heartiest laughter is a screen for the most painful tragedies. If this Johnny Carson's Black Book series has touched your curiosity, don't stop here. The archive of Hollywood's dark secrets is still very thick and has many corners yet to be illuminated. Click follow now so you don't miss the next earth-shattering investigative series. Leave a comment. Among these 7 demons, who shocked and haunted you the most? Share this story if you want to expose the truth behind the fake halo. See you in the next files where the truth will be even more horrific.